analytical essays on Tamil cinema offer perspectives that are often missed out in mainstream writing. In particular, they try to understand and unravel how caste plays an important role in constructing cinematic narratives and its effects on film criticism and consumption. In 2018, he won the Red Ink Award under the Lifestyle and Entertainment category for his essay on Paranjit's Kala titled The Dharavi Story in Tamil Cinema How Kala Inverts the Nayakan Gaze. Most recently, his short film, The Discreet Charm of Savarnas, released in 2020 to great appreciation. He was here with us last year in conversation with Professor Vijayata to talk about his film. Today, Sir will address us on reading Paranjit's film. We welcome you back, Sir.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for the invitation. Yeah. We can, so we chat, right? Like,
Whenever you're ready.
So thanks for the invitation again. So one of the things that I was thinking in general is about when it comes to Ranjit films, people often talk about most often I think critics and the audience, they end up talking about his politics most of the time. Some of his dialogues are talked about, and the general politics, and often in fact, like I think it's very easily people label his films as Dalit films, almost as if it's only about the lives of Dalits, as if the films are sort of I mean, even though I think like somebody like Ranjit, he asserts his Dalit identity, but I think I've seen that he almost never calls his films Dalit film or Dalit cinema. Neither does he embrace the title Dalit filmmaker. He embraces a Dalit identity, but I think when it comes to making films, he thinks like any other artist. He wants to appeal to the universal, human emotion. But I think most critics often look at it through a very what an artist use. I mean, the political identity which is asserted is sort of used to sort of pigeonhole, put them into a certain compartment. So the politics are often talked about as films, and apart from the politics, people talk about the dialogues. If there's a dialogue about Dr. Ambedkar and Gandhi or something on caste, people sort of get onto that, and that becomes the the primary discussion point, and often the art of his films itself. As an artist, because he's somebody he's a visual artist. He's somebody who went to fine art school. He didn't go to film school. He rather wanted, he is qualified to be a painter, and then he became a filmmaker. So there's a certain, as a painter, he brings something to cinema. And I think very little of that is actually talked about, and so a lot of times, even people who defend his films, a lot of their time goes in firefighting with Savarna writers and critics. So the art is often missed out. So that's something. I thought it was a great opportunity to talk about that. That's one thing. And I think something else worth thinking about is I was wondering what could Dalit aesthetic actually mean? Because how does a Dalit become different in a society? How is a Dalit's expression different from any other person? And I think in a caste society, I think everybody has the baggage of caste. And the baggage of caste prevents people from being full human beings. Everybody is in some way a compromised human, unable to live, the existence of, this human existence because of the caste structure. And the caste limits their expression. Who they can be friends with, who they can love, who they can, sleep with. Now, everything is controlled by caste, and I think this happens to artists as well. Artists, from Brahmin communities or Savarnas or even any other upper caste, I think their expression is also limited in some way because of the caste baggage. They're sort of unable to express themselves fully as humans. And I think somebody from a Dalit community has the freedom. Somebody who's embraced Dalit identity, as opposed to the caste structure. I think they have the freedom to express themselves very fully. And I think by doing that, I think their films become the most human films, which is why I think when, an artist from a Dalit community writes, speaks, reads, makes a film, anything, that's the most human expression, in Indian caste society, the Dalit has a higher chance of expressing as a human than anyone else, So ideally, the expressions of such a artist is the most universal. It's most universal because what is more human than talking about equality? That's the most human thing. So that's what I look at in Ranjit's films. I think I mean I find this new films the most humanistic. The universal appeal in them. They're not just for Dalits. In fact, they're for everybody. It's there's a universal element of equality and brotherhood and fighting against inequality. That makes it super extremely universal. And I think how he infuses his craft and art also makes it even more universal. I just want to touch upon a few broad influences that I interpret in his films. One of them is I think he has a fascination. There's something that's commonly known about his films is he is a huge fan of Afro-American music and Afro-American films. He's a big fan of Spike Lee and Rihanna and Malcolm X. So those are his primary inspirations, and you see them often in his films. Like say, look at a film like Madras. You find strains of a film like City of God there. City of Gods, and I think in terms of how he narrates a story, in a sort of among the slum, urban slum. I think it has a very Afro-American element in Madras. And in fact, I think there's one song called Kagida Kappal in Madras. It's a beautifully choreographed song. And even that song, the way he choreographs it, it's very similar to how, the dancing, the camera movement, on the staging, it's very similar to how Afro-American musicals are done, So that's one of his very primary influences. Apart from Afro-American influences, I think he also has a very strong Asian influence. Particularly, it's very strange because most Indian filmmakers, they try to imitate. If they try to imitate America, they often try to imitate Hollywood. They imitate Coppola and Godfather or Spielberg. The big names from Hollywood. But I think Ranjit, rather than imitating them, I think his inspirations are a lot from Afro-American filmmakers and Afro-American music. Another thing is that in Asia, the most popular one people imitate is Kurosawa, the Japanese filmmaker. And Japanese films are, there are a lot of, very popular Japanese filmmakers, and Kurosawa is very popular is often imitated because Kurosawa is a lot similar to the Kurosawa's films are a lot similar to the Western format, the Western genre in American films. So that's something that's commonly imitated. But I think in Ranjit's films, you often find a strong resemblance to Hong Kong films. Even when talking in an interview about Sarpata, he says he was a lot inspired by In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai. In setting a period, he borrows a very Wong Kar-wai style in the film. And apart from that, even if you look at Kabali, in how the gangster film, when we understand gangster film, we often imagine it as a very action-oriented film, and I think that's why a lot of people also got disappointed with Kabali because they expected it to be a lot of a very American action-packed film, American-style action-packed film. But then it was a story about a brooding life of an aging gangster, and that's a very very Hong Kong film genre, and I think in fact the final climax in the final climax in Kabali, it resembles John Woo's films, Hard Boiled, and some of Hard Boiled and Killer. Some of the protagonist coming with two guns. It's a very John Woo sort of signature, and I think he borrows that as well. And apart from this, of course, another thing I left out about Afro-American music is that the whole idea of putting together caste as collective itself is a very, it's very borrowed from jazz. It's the kind of clothes they wear, and they might live in slums and they live with poverty, but they're extremely well-dressed people, who sing songs of dignity. He borrows from the blues and the jazz of the Afro-American and created the caste as collective. Apart from that, I think he also borrows a lot from the Tamil street kuttu. The kuttu is the street play of the Tamil form of the Bahujans, and he borrows that often in his films. For example, in Kala, the climax, it's unimaginable to have a climax which is a dance, a performance. It's a dance performance, a colorful dance performance. That's something that you often. It's almost like a very trippy trance sort of dance. It's not like a very choreographed thing. It's sort of wild, but there's sort of there's sort of a method to the madness how that dance is performed. And that's very rooted in Tamil Kuthu tradition. And he borrows that and for his film in Kala. And another two things I think is it's often I think he's also very even though in Tamil Nadu the Ambedkarite movement is sort of looked at as in opposition to the Dravidian movement. The Dravidian movement till the 90s, and then the Ambedkarite movement from the 90s is sort of looked at as something that came up because of the insufficient nature of the Dravidian movement. So sometimes it's interpreted as the Dravid, the American movement is interpreted in contrast or in conflict with the Dravidian movement. But I think you see his films, I think there's very strong Dravidian influence. One of the things that even in Sarpata Parambre, he's probably this is the first film where I think in recent times where a DMK member was shown with so much Pasupati's character was captured with so much self-respect, and I think that self-respect of that man, how he stands for his ideals, that is purely grained in the Dravidian movement. I think it was a very, people often thought he was anti-Periyar and anti-Dravidian movement, but I think it was mostly, it was almost a love letter to the Dravidian movement. I mean, he wants Kabilan emerges out of the Dravidian movement and wears the blue coat in the end, but still, it almost feels like a love letter with some complaints. That's the kind of influence I think he has. Another thing also, if you look at even Kala, it's a highly sort of inspired by Ravana Kavyam. Ravana Kavyam was written by Pulavar Kulandai, where they try to invert Ramayana. They try to make Ravana the protagonist, and that again is sort of rooted in the Dravidian movement. And I think in Dasara, you see it's often Ravana who burns, but like he takes it from Ravana Kavyam, where it's not just 10-headed Ravana. It becomes an infinite-headed Ravana, and then he murders this Brahmin man, who sort of symbolizes Ram. I think so. There's a lot of influences that he takes from the Dravidian movement. In fact, there's a very popular Tamil writer called Shobha Sakti. He's a Sri Lankan Tamil writer. He's located in London now, and he writes. He's very popular, and he called Kala as almost the sequel to Parasakti, and Parasakti is considered to be the most powerful Dravidian film, and I think Kala, which is an Ambedkarite film, was interpreted as a sequel to Parasakti. So there's a certain that influence. And of course, another influence he often has is often a very Buddhistic influences. So his very first film, Atakati, it's about a man who keeps falling in love infinitely with people. He falls in love with one woman and it ends in heartbreak, and then he falls in another woman, and it's almost a surreal thing. He repeats the same cycle again and again, but almost as if it's something new happening to him. He's not surprised with the cycle. Every time he falls in love, partly, that sort of symbolizes how romance is among youngsters. He captures the North Madras and the life of those people. Another thing also, there's also a slight a Buddhist surreal nature in that film. It's about desire and sorrow. He pursues desire and then it ends in sorrow, and then again he escapes out of that. It's sort of a recycle sort of, which is often a quality of Buddhism. A rebirth. Like you have to escape from desire to escape this. No, that's almost a philosophical need. Even though the movie is very silly, it's sort of in a very light and looks like a silly film. It almost has a surreal philosophy quality to it. So you find those Buddhist elements in his films. Apart from that, yeah. So these are the broad ones I wanted to initially talk about. And also another thing I wanted to say about Sarpata Parambre is also that I think a lot of people thought it's going to be like, when they thought of boxing, they thought it's going to be like a Raging Bull and Cinderella Man. And I think very particularly Ranjit resists the Hollywood model. Like he's very particular about not replicating the Hollywood model, and which is why I think he surprised everybody by saying that he's actually borrowing from Wong Kar-wai, in setting the period. So more than the boxing, the film becomes about the time and space. So these are the broad things I want to talk about in terms of influences. And I don't know if you have something to ask, and we can take it further.
I had one specific question with regard to Sarpata only, and while it's well, it's amazing how much Ranjit uh, holds on to this idea of the artist in his films. That's what comes through most, especially in all his films. Him as the artist, or also the characters as artist, especially in Sarpata as uh, the man who wasn't in the ring and didn't really receive any official training to be a boxer.
Right,
How he
right,
stands at the ring, which is also a certain kind of periphery in some sense.
right, right,
Watches people box and then learns how to become a boxer. So that
right,
journey from a spectator to an artist
right, right.
can feel very personal to a Dalit viewer.
True,
Uh,
true, true.
so while it's true that his films bear that universalness in,
Right.
and that's how it is supposed to be for all artists.
True,
It's
true, true.
it's a great compliment to an artist if they're read by many people,
Right,
watched by many
right,
people.
right, right,
But simultaneously, the hit that you receive, and I'm using the word hit as almost a certain kind of high that you receive,
right, right,
you watch a character like Kabila um, making it against all odds.
right, right, right.
It's like an almost personal victory to the Dalit
True,
viewer.
true, true, true.
What do you make of this, as part of the Dalit aesthetics that we
Right,
are raised here?
right, right.
How do you think? Do you think there is a difference in the way in which, uh, uh, not necessarily a Savarna Dalit kind of view and nonsense,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
that the way in which it can feel like a personal victory to someone watching it? So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think it does feel, personal because I think, I mean, this whole area of, gatekeeping, like who can play something and who cannot play something. It's true. It's very specific because, in India, like even a village is constructed. There is there's a village and there's a cherry. People are not even living together. I think this is also in some way. I mean, it's true that it's rooted very much, in the Indian structure. But there's also I would like to look at it. There's also some universal, nature to it. A film like Gataka. There's a film about in called Gataka. It says only people with certain qualities and a certain merit, can fly to space. And there's a man who doesn't qualify. He doesn't have that merit, but he still wants to space. But so he pretends he sort of he partly pretends and gets into the system, and he becomes the most qualifiable person. So initial uh, I find how Kabilan breaks the gate in Sarpata because he's not invited anywhere. There's no rule. There's no guideline. There's no rule which invited him. There's nothing which gives him much opportunity. It's an accident. It's rather an accident, and he jumps
Yeah.
that gate, and then takes it on. And once he crosses that gate, and I think there's nothing stopping him. But I think it's true. It's true. It's very I think in the Indian setting, it's something that I think somebody who's as a Dalit who's watching it, it totally can connect to it. But I think that's there in Gataka too. There's a film on space traveling. That's there, and that's what's fascinating to me. This universalness is what I think I've been, particularly in his films, I'm fascinated with. Yeah. In fact, another thing I was also thinking about when you said Zapata, there's a beautiful thing I missed it out when talking earlier when Kabilan and his opponent, they're preparing for the final match. That's again a very Buddhist Zen-like thing. When the song Mie Oli plays, if you see, actually, I think a lot of people missed it when the opponent, I forgot his name now, the opponent who's preparing, he's actually climbing rocks and he's breaking stones. He's climbing rocks. It's almost like he's doing what is sort of required. What would be the normal way of preparing for a thing? He's breaking big things. He's breaking rocks. He's climbing hills. But then, Kabilan doesn't do that. Kabilan is fighting with water, and water is, he's not breaking water. It's like it's that he brings in that like Kabilan cannot, because Kabilan cannot in some way break rocks and win the competition. He takes a very Zen-like approach, to beat the mainstream. And I thought that was very beautifully, picturized And then bringing in a fisherman who sort of understands the sea, and it's also a certain Baujan building up certain a Baujan relationship there, and how how like a rock was water, and how water gives him a certain flexibility and a fluidity which allows him to beat somebody who's mastered over the mountains and the rocks, which I thought was very fascinating because that's how even rocks are built or eroded, right? Nobody thinks water can erode rock. You think, what can water do? There's a huge mountain, but then water has the potential to erode a rock, and I think that's how he symbolically converts that in that song. Niye Oli. I thought that was super fascinating. And I think there is that's also in a caste structure. You can look at how for Dalits to beat the system, they're often they play by their own rules. They don't play by the caste structure rules. So I found it very fascinating, particularly.
In the, I don't know if you read this, but Arunmani sir wrote about Sarpatta. He reviewed the film, and he mentions that in the song, when we see his competence climbing rocks and training on top of rocks, what Kabila returns to in some sense is to water,
Right.
to be trained under a fisherman who became a boxer who then returned to fishing.
Right.
And when in one scene when Daddy comes to drop him there, he says, "What man, you come back again to throw dirt back into the ocean? Is it or something?"
Right.
So he says that this return, in some sense, for Kabila to train with water, to train to go catch crabs and learn how to, and even with the lyrics that appear then, is something very definitively. I think this is the arena of Dalit aesthetics for me, in some sense.
Right.
The song and what you see in the song,
Right.
and him being trained, in some sense, to go back to your roots and train yourself and then come. Something like that.
True.
While when you mentioned the universality bit, this is something that I've noticed in Sarpata, which is that the most touching scene in the film for me was when, uh, not even when he was humiliated in the ring, which is a very definite caste ritualistic way of punishing someone, which is to strip them. But the absence of that scene again and again in the film, in that Ranjit doesn't return to that scene. He's not interested. Once he's shown it, and that's it. We have to move on now.
Right.
I love that absence. It's present and yet absent in one way.
Yeah.
And in the towards the right before he finally begins training, he tells his mother, "Take me back to your womb.
Right.
I feel like I'm without my art, I'm no one." And I thought it was a very moving scene because it seems as though he wants to get back in the ring, not so much to avenge what happened there.
Right.
Just in some sense absent. It's almost as if it didn't happen.
True.
But he feels like he needs to return to his art once again. He needs to return to his passion once again.
True.
And in this, I think there's a lot of heart in this scene. When,
That's true. That's very true. No.
So in these moments, it's like someone giving a Dalit person, especially a manual to deal with art, a manual to sort of figure out who they are as artists. Never before have I encountered a film where the Dalit protagonist, I'm sorry to use the word again, but is seen as an artist, or you get to see him as an art. Usually, a film like this will circle back to that one scene, and it'll end up being about some kind of vengeance. And even his opponents are not bad people; they are good sports people.
Very. Yeah.
What did you think about this? This is something even you pointed out in your review, where you said that the fight is never between upper caste and lower caste. He doesn't think it that.
True. I mean, one thing I felt. I mean, how I understood it is when I watched the film is that I think the one thing you understand through Ranjit's films is that I think he's also. I think he's embracing the principles of Buddhism a lot more as an individual. Also, if you see him articulating about it, you find the last 10 years he's become more vocal, and I think in one of the times he said, "I think I'm trying to get closer and closer to Buddhism." And I think that's something increasingly is reflecting in his films as well. I think what was which is why I think earlier his films were about assertion. There was a certain in Kala and Kabali, it's about assertion, it's about fighting with an antagonistic. And I think which is a very give it back to them sort of thing. Like if somebody hits you, give it back to them, which is also ingrained in the certain the way the Ambedkar politics exists in Tamil Nadu. It's a sort of drawn from that. The way what the language of VCK, the language of Pudi Tamalagam at one point. So it's sort of drawn from the politics of the state, of course. But I think there's a certain moving. I think his as an individual as well as an artist, I think he's moving from that sort of uh, from a very assertive driven politics to a very philosophy driven, very Buddhist philosophy sort of all, which is why I think there's no antagonist here. He's not fighting an antagonist, but he's fighting himself. He's fighting himself, and he's also finding himself. Which is why the song also, the Niye Oli, you're the light to yourself. He borrows that from Buddha, and I was very surprised because I remember writing something about it, saying that this looks like a Buddhist line, but I was also skeptical, am I overdoing this reading of his films? And I think later in the interview he talked about how the song marries the line of Buddha and the line of Muhammad Ali, so I think again, it's like a bit of Buddhism and a bit of Afro-American. He keeps going back to some of these places. Now, I found it very a sort of taken from the Buddhist thing of finding yourself. I think finding yourself is often the more bigger contest than fighting your opponents. So I looked at it as a reflection of his own a slight change in his politics over time.
Okay. I want to return to something you mentioned earlier before we began the session, where you said that until Sarpata, it was as if he was still being tested, whether he is an artist or whether he'll only make political films, that. And somehow with Sarpata, he seems to have sealed the deal. Now he shut people down.
Right.
I want to. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that for our viewers who.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, see, I think one of the things that was happening, and I think he sort of, well, I'll see. So one of the things that was earlier happening, like he was trying to tell stories which are rooted in the Dalit lives. That's the kind of stories he was saying, and I think, irrespective of whether his films were good or not, I think there's a people were just wait, irrespective of the film for what it stands for. I think people were waiting to rubbish his films. And I think because if you realize his first two films, where people did not know that this man is a Dalit. The politics was sort of much more subtle and buried under the main the sort of the main plot. So I think there was not much resistance to his first two films, but the success of Madras also allowed him to assert his identity, outside of films, in interviews, in political speeches, and I think that sort of garnered quite some hatred for him. Which is why I think Kala and Kabali were very rubbish. People, I think because Rajinikanth said something problematic before Kala release, very progressive people, very politically progressive people of, like very, people who represent certain, progressive outfits, they wanted Kala to be banned, because they were saying that Rajinikanth has said something problematic, we should ban Kala. But, they never wanted to ban any of the other films that Rajinikanth was acting after Kala. They just were, there's quite some hatred then. But I think now people have resigned to the fact, like, it's like, I think it's something that I would tell earlier. Earlier, I think people were just trying to rubbish him off and dismiss and think that this man is going to disappear. But now attacking him, they start wondering, because now I think people who are attacking him repeatedly are looked with suspicion, And it's also like, okay, am I being a casteist by not liking a Ranjit film, So I think now there's a pressure to like Ranjit's films, I think, I think that's what I think even if, I think that's also dangerous. I mean, I think he's a confident filmmaker, doesn't matter to him. But I'm saying people are now desperate to like anything, even if,
They haven't liked it, have to say they've liked it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if he makes a bad film, I think people are going to claim that's a masterpiece too. It's that sort of danger we're right now in. So because I think people have realized that if we call this, if we say this film is bad, then they're sort of doubting their own, sort of own, cast. Am I being cast just by doing this, or maybe there's some buried, maybe this residual caste system in me, and that's why I'm not able to stand this film. They've got that sort of thing. Also, another thing I think Ranjit himself mentioned is, I think earlier when he wanted to make Sarpata, I think it was much more a darker story. He said how he wrote the film also in a much more darker shades. It's not as mainstream as this film is, and I think he was very conscious about giving something which is also mass pleasing in some way. He wanted something to make everybody happy. Like you want. I think in some way you want to shut up all his critics also. And make something that's truly mass appealing. I mean, which is also truly his film, but also mass appealing in some way. And I think that sort of all things coming together made it which is why people ask me, why have we not written much about Sar? But I'm like, dude, everybody's writing about it. Everybody's claiming it's a masterpiece. I mean, I have nothing new to say, because in Kara and Kabali, people were refusing to write about it. The art of the art of film, which is why I think when I wrote it, it became like something nobody else wrote. But I think Zapata, I think everybody's writing a 5,000 word essay. So it's like mine will get lost. It's okay.
But the thing is, they're all saying the same thing. There are very, very few super reviews. Only one review that I read that sort of made me look at the film once again was Arul Sir's review. Yes. And also because I think this is something, again, the third question that I wanted to ask you was, what do you think happens when? So this is because I told you I spoke to Jay Singh in the morning.
Yeah.
Something that I think you and I have talked about in the past, which is when people begin doing things that they like doing simply because they like doing it. Like for Jay Singh, if it was taking pictures, or for you, whether it was writing or watching films and thinking about making films, or for Paranjit, which is when he started making films. And then when this idea of uh, your identity, you discover it, whether by accident or someone else points it out for you, something.
Right.
What do you think happens to our art when earlier we weren't that aware and then we become aware?
No, hello. Sorry. I think Vijeta's screen is stuck.
Do you think that's something that that's interesting in terms of...
We lost you for a bit. Can you repeat the question?
Wait, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Just give me one moment. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm interested in the question of what happens to art once our discoveries become a part of it. Is this something that you think about too?
Yeah, that's something I've thought about. For example, I think I've thought about, for example, I'll take my own example. I would say is I always wanted to write, and I wanted to, I think from the age of say 7 or 8 years, I thought I fantasized about becoming a filmmaker. But I think I never knew what stories to tell. I never knew. I'll watch a Spielberg movie and think, okay, I can make a film like Spielberg. I'll watch Maniratnam and I'm like, oh, I can make my Maniratnam. I'll watch, I'll watch a Karan Johar movie and think, okay, like I can tell a Karan Johar. So what happens is, I don't know who I am. I don't know what story I'm like. I don't know what story I'm supposed to say. Do I even have a story? I don't know. So I think when you're not found your identity, and when you're not embraced it, you're only going to mimic somebody else. You're always, you probably try to mimic the most favorite of filmmakers. You're only mimicking them. But I think it's only when you really, you sort of identify who you are, and embrace your identity, and suddenly, the moment you identify yourself and you understand, you embrace your identity, there are hundreds of your own stories pouring out. I don't know where they're waiting. It's almost like, I mean, now I want to make 100 other things. It's like where were all the stories? Where were they hiding? I don't know. It's very surprised. But I think I think what I think is you become an artist only when you actually embrace your identity. The whole what is the purpose of art is itself is what is I mean, art is essentially two people communicating. You're communicating in the world. You have something to say, and if you want to say something, you have to know who you are. Like unless you understand yourself, what are you going to say? You're going to repeat somebody else's words. So I think you're a true artist only when you identify, you find yourself, and all artistic expression is that, right? Like it's about identifying ourselves, and trying to be in touch with what we really feel. Because like, even writing a film review, uh, I watch a film, and then sometimes I think, oh, this will be cool to write about these things. Maybe I'll crack a joke about this. Maybe these are the cool statements I can make about the film. And it's very tempting to do that, because I might have read someone else write something similar to that and all. But then I, have to cut out all this external noises and try to truly listen to myself. What do I feel, And I have to cut out, once you cut out all these noises and listen to yourself, and there's something you feel, something and when you listen to yourself and then you write it, suddenly people like it, because I think I've often felt that the moment I fake it, there is, people don't like it, only when I'm really in touch with myself and write it, I think it becomes automatically, I think people find something interesting, because I think that's the purpose of, that's what being an artist is, I think, so I think until somebody embraces uh, their own identity, they're just being a mimicry artist. They become a true artist only when they embrace themselves.
Yeah, very interesting thing you said about uh, art being a part of the identity itself, and how it sort of, you can only embrace the
Mhm.
art once you embrace the identity. That's
Yeah.
very interesting. And this is something that more or less uh, we've had Du Saraswati and Sukirta Rani, who said that yesterday. Sukirta Rani said that for her, freedom is at the center of Dalit aesthetics, and before her, Du Saraswati said that for her, the when Dalit people make art, they're also making some sense of dignity for themselves,
Right. Right.
which we, and you've said that today, that to embrace your art is to embrace your identity. I think they're all each different things from each other, but also very acutely sharp things to say about our art and identity in that sense.
Right.
Thank you very much for saying that.
Right.
I want to throw open the floor for questions from the audience at this point, but meanwhile, I'll also want to continue this conversation.
Yeah.
So I have maybe one round of question for you,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect.
no, but before that, I want to hear if you have any like closing comments about what we've said so far, because my question is now about your art and what you want to take from it.
No, no, I didn't get it. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Uh, I wanted to know if uh, what was that moment for you with your own relationship to the art that you make, where you realized that uh, and I'm drawing very much from Kabila's own surprise when he enters the ring. And I don't know if we get to see that moment, but through the film, he is sort of practicing already at the periphery. He's
Right.
hitting
Right.
when he's watching. And I
Right.
think, as you pointed out, it's an accidental thing that allows him to see himself as ready for
Right.
this.
Right. Right.
Uh, when has there ever been a moment when you were surprised by something that you produced?
That's I think everything is a surprise often.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, actually, I don't know, I have a sort of theory to this. I mean, because often people say, which like people like, geniuses like A. Rahman and Ilayaraja, they often compose some songs. I'd say this is God given, because I think even those geniuses, they're not sure where the songs are coming from. I think they're surprised that this song came and landed, and I think they for sure feel that they're not responsible for it, because I don't think they're saying in this sort of humility, they really feel it's coming from somewhere outside. And I think what I feel is, I've been trying to understand for myself, what is to tell a story, or what is to make a film, what is to be an artist. I think I often feel these stories are already existing around us. The story I'm trying to tell or the stories I'm trying to write, they already exist. It's like how you see in these ghost films. There's a big bungalow and there'll be ghosts around the house, and they enter the most vulnerable person. They often enter a young girl. Because a young girl, a young teen girl, is considered to be the most vulnerable person, and the ghost enters their body and controls everything. And I think an artist is like that. I think uh, when you're in touch with yourself, I think those are the moments when you're vulnerable and sensitive. And I think you don't produce the art. I think these stories are already circulating around the world around us. I think the communities around the society or the communities or the people around us, the people who lived before us, I think these are stories already waiting. They already exist. They're just waiting. They're waiting for a vulnerable being to enter and then take control of them and tell the story. So I think an artist is really a medium. Some sort of an artist is a merely medium sort of thing. I'm not really like, it's not like, because I'm not producing the story. This story didn't come from me because it existed. It I think the moment, like when I'm allowing myself to be vulnerable and sensitive, I'm giving a chance for the story to enter me and come out in some form. And that's how I see it. Which is why I think you look at all these people, and people often wonder, how did Ranjit came? How did somebody like Ranjit happen? How did somebody like Ilayaraja happen? I don't think they happened because they were geniuses. I don't think so. I think the stories were already waiting to be told. They were just waiting. I think they were just waiting for the most vulnerable individual to enter, take control over that person, and get out of the world. And I think somebody like Ilayaraja or Ranjit or these sensitive, vulnerable peoples who sort of telling stories which have been waiting to be told. So yeah.
Almost like exorcism.
Yeah,
Where, yeah, just like that. When
yeah.
you
Which is why I think Raman says God is giving, because he's not sure where it's coming from. I think it's coming from the world around us. So you think maybe a divine source is helping you. So you often put it on, something, maybe the divine force is giving me because it has a special liking to me. I don't think any divine force likes people, doesn't like people, and that's a very. I think it's like, I think because they understand that they don't own the stories. It's not theirs. I think they're understanding that. But I think so which is why the humility is there. But I think they're also unable to understand where it's coming from. But I think it's coming from the people around us, the people before us, and their lives and their stories.
yeah, that's very stirring. Thank you. This I don't know if you heard of this. This is something that surprised me when I first heard. This Hindustani singer called Kishori Amonkar, who in an interview said that she practices music every morning, uh, so that, and after a while you become so, uh, you become the tool from which the music comes. That she's not that the rag is not coming from her. That she's the tool now, like almost the instrument, and it's just coming. She's not singing the rag; it's just coming out of her.
True, true.
And this is a very. I used to think that. That someday writing will come to like that, in that you become the tool and then it'll just come like that if you keep doing it more and more and more.
Right, right.
Do you think it's different with us? As in, you've already answered that in some sense.
Right,
Because
right.
you said that it's almost like an exorcism where something takes you over and your stories take you over and you start doing it.
Right, right.
Um, while it's true that no art is original, and we've sort of stopped debating that long ago, in that
Right,
whether something is original or not.
right.
Uh, when do you think we will we ever reach a position where we become responsible for art that is not related to our ancestors in any way?
You think we'll be able to produce art which is not related to our ancestors?
No, not like ability, like, but like, do you think it's necessary, or do you think? What do you think about this?
I think it is going to see, like I said, these stories that people say are, I strongly believe these are stories waiting already.
Hmm.
You know, So I think these stories existed even before me. I'm telling a story, they probably existed before me, and I came later, to sort of
Mm.
borrow it and write it in some form or make it into some form. So it's often connected to the a connected history of forefathers and foremothers and the community. Uh, that is how it can be for anybody. I think.
Okay.
Uh,
Thank you.
yeah.
We have a question here from Professor Ankuna. She says, the one extremely interesting thing about Sarpata for me was the background music they play every time Kabila fights.
Right.
The way he's talking about serious things through this background music and doesn't stop with that, but also use it for humor, like Looney Tunes when Dancing Rose is knocked out, for instance.
Right. Right.
As if you've noticed things like these in other films as well, in Ranjit's other films. As an artist, how do you think the music in his films tells stories?
Uh, See, I think what I personally felt is there is very drastic difference between Ranjit's use of music in his earlier films and Sarpata. I think both music as well as cinematography change a lot. I felt, I think one thing about his earlier films is the music always is more pronounced. It's louder. It sort of takes more space, and he keeps cinematography very understated. In fact, I think his cinematographer Murli says we don't want to make anything beautiful. I think the life is already existing, we just want to capture the life. So they keep the cinematographer's work as sort of structured and minimal. He's not, it's a deliberate choice to not beautify things. But I think in Sapata, I think they sort of reversed it. The music to me felt like very understated, and it's sort of minimal. There's just one song, and the music is also very, I mean, kept to two songs, sorry, and the music is kept minimal. But I think he allowed the cinematographer to be a slightly flamboyant, because it being a period film in terms of the colors, I think it's a lot more a visually stunning film compared to some of his earlier films, where the cinematographer slightly cinematography work is slightly understated. So I did ask him. So I actually met him for something else, and I asked him. Looks like a very conscious choice. Your cinematographer is sort of flamboyant here, and for the first time, I think your music director, has gone, quite. He said, I think, we had too much problem with the music director, and I think we didn't have enough time to compose. So we used whatever little we had. So that's so what I thought was a creative choice was an operational issue. So that was very amusing. Yeah.
This is something that I like. Like, but very often I come to something thinking, oh my god, like this is very deliberately happening. And
Yeah.
then the filmmaker will, know that was an accident. I was thinking about something else and this happened. It's very reassuring also.
Right.
We have another question. Thank you for sharing your thoughts about art and identity. Is it fair that Sarpata is called only a sports drama film? Is it? Do you think it's more than just that?
Oh, I think Sapata is certainly not just a sports drama film, but I think it's probably, it works on multiple layers. I think it's probably the most. I think it's the film with most layers. Even for Ranjit films, always have layers, but I think even in its own standards, I think this movie is it's more spelled out in much. On one level, you have a commentary on the Dravidian movement and the emergence of the Ambedkarite movement. Another level, you have a boxer story, and then it's almost like a sociological study of the place and time. Leave the game. It's about the people, the clothes, the culture. On that, and and then it also has a very universal underdog story. Of who you think is not going to win. Surprises everybody. So I think it works on so many levels, which is why I think it's sort of everybody is able to take something from it. I think it was listed in New York Times as one of the films to watch out in Amazon Prime. It's because I think because of these multiple layers, everybody is able to access what's closer to them and enjoy it for what it is. This is something I think Ilayaraja often used to do. He often used to spell it out also. It's like I think when he does a fusion of the local, folk music, and he mixes it with Western. And I think in one of the song, he uses the word, "I." You know, he uses the word "I" in one of the songs, and I think it's the character himself says, both parties, a Western band party and there'll be a folk music troupe. They'll be playing at the same time and do a lot of noise, and then we reach a consensus that okay, we'll both play together. You take whatever you want, you know, which is a very Village does that. He even spells it out sometimes, like in that film. But I think that's something Ranjit also does. Another thing I also wanted to think is there's something very fascinating Ranjit does, which something I missed out earlier. One thing you look at it is um, pan-Indian films are often can only often are Brahmin films. A Brahmin Savana only have the potential to be a pan-Indian film. Because Dalit stories or any other Bahujan stories are also they are very rooted in a very specific location. And because they're rooted, they become a very locally rich story. But there's an inability to understand it universally. Like say a film like Bharti Raj. He's an OBC filmmaker, and they were community. It's very rooted, but it's very rooted. The movies are beautiful films, but I think it's very difficult for somebody in Delhi or somebody in Bengal understand the film. I think Ranjit is very conscious about the choice. He wants his stories to be reach a pan-Indian, pan-world audience, which is why you look at it. You look at what Savannah or films do. The Bollywood does. It either goes for it has these anti-Pakistan war films. It has these sports films. Because sports also Chak De or cricket films or even Mary Kom stories. Sports has the ability to sort of reach a pan-Indian audience. Cricket in itself is a sort of nationalistic sport. So I think Ranjit is very careful in understanding what works for a pan-Indian audience. I think a lot of people have not watched Madras and or his first film, Dimantakati, which I think were very rooted in Madras and the suburbs of Madras. I think a lot of people say, even I know friends who say that they want to watch Madras, but they never watch it. But they all watched Kala, Kabali, and Sarpata because I think Kala, he went to Dharavi. Dharavi is the place. It's the most sort of criticized place in India. White filmmakers, but he sort of used their own a British location, and then he converts that into a Dalit Bahujan story. And in Kabali also, he goes to Malaysia, and by going to a Tamil diaspora location, he tells a pan-world Tamil story. It's not just located just Dalits, and again he deliberately chooses sports now, and by choosing sports, because I think like somebody asked the question, is it called? I think that label of a sports drama is what he used that as an excuse to break into different markets. I think markets which will not otherwise listen to him were forced to listen to him for that reason.
That, this bit about Kala, Kabali, and then Sarpata is true, though. You can see it happening in the way Kala and Kabali were marketed as outrightly certain kind of films. With Sarpata,
Right.
it's hard to locate it as like that. So you have to accept it as pan-Indian. There's just no excuse.
Yeah.
It makes it very difficult to call it anything else.
True. And I think it's very difficult to tell a Dalit story and call it pan because I think the lives of Dalits in Rajasthan is so vastly different from Tamil Nadu or those Bengal. Unlike the Brahmins who have a very similar culture cutting across states. Dalits have very varied history, very very cultural practices. To convert that into a sort of a pan-Indian phenomenon, it's something he has cracked, and I think he is able to crack it every time, which is something people never thought is possible until he showed it. And even Manjuli, you look at it, Manjuli's films are great, but Manjuli's films are very rooted and they might reach a few people here and there, but they don't have the sort of pan-Indian appeal that Ranjit films has. So I think he's very particular about it.
Okay. We have one question here. One thing I noticed Anushka says, one thing Akanksha, sorry, says, I noticed that in Sarpata, all of the story ends and begins with a ring. It becomes a space for love, anger, personal, political, and everything else. Can you please tell us a little more about the way Ranjit plays with spaces in his other films, whether this appears in his other films as well? As in if it does, in what ways are you recognizing it? If you,
Uh,
if you
I think what I found, in this use of space is that more than the space, I think it's often interesting how many people space is never disconnected from the people who habitat that place. It's often kind of number of people there. If you that's what the things you look at say Nayagan. You choose Dharavi, Mariatam shows Dharavi, and Dharavi looks like there's so much empty space in Dharavi. There are very few people scattered here and there wearing white and white. But I think Ranjit knows how Bahujan's Dalit spaces and Bahujan spaces are. They're often might be a very small or constrained places with a lot of people. I think something a friend wrote a piece first post about Ranjit films and Asuran as not Asuran, sorry, about Karnan. It says how they've never. I think the number of people populating a Ranjit's films is so high. No other Indian filmmaker has been able to show so many people in the same frame where each one really has a certain quality. They're not just like props, but then there's certain characteristic and quality assigned to them. And I think how Ranjit just rather than just looking at space, I think it's more interesting how he populates space with people. I mean, that's what I think is something interesting about his films.
I think we're done. That's the. Do we have any questions on YouTube? Can you please check? Those of you who are watching it on YouTube, just let me know. Ankuna says, "Thank you, sir. Sometimes accidents are the best things to have happened, and to people and to films. Thank you." Yeah, that's in response to the cinematography. I think that's about it. But thank you for a very great, stimulating conversation around Paranjit's films. This,
Thanks.
from everything that we've heard about Paranjit's films, otherwise I mean, this is the closest we can come to talking about films in the way that you have understood it, in the way you've recognized it. Because again, as you pointed out, his films tend to run into a discourse where only one thing gets talked about and
Yeah.
everything else gets left out.
Yeah.
And so his name will conveniently be left out of lists that are making, list making is another huge Savarna passion these days. When his name will get, left out of top great filmmakers or whatever, but it'll be there in one top five Dalit filmmakers or something like that.
Right, right.
But this has been a great way of looking at him as an artist, as a filmmaker. This is something that we were hoping to do. So thank you very much for taking out the time and coming and talking to us.
Thanks.
We're also looking forward to your next film so that we can screen it in college and have another discussion around it.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, now I'm just trying to make romantic films. We already shot a very small romantic film, because like I said, when we made something on cast, and I keep getting calls. Do you want to talk about cast loss? Do you want to talk about reservation? Do you want to talk about honor killing? I'm like, my film was a comedy. You know what? Like.
Can I talk about comedy? Yeah.
Yeah. So I decided to jump into romance. So I think people can, people with relationship problems will contact me now. So that's my goal.
Very good. This is the best way to knock this out, I think. Great. I was also thinking when you said that thing about people watching Sarpata and if they liked it or they didn't like it, but they have to now say that they've liked it because otherwise they'll be like, "Ayo, am I sounding too cast?" One person who came to mind who fits that category is our person from your film Discreet Charm of the Savarnas, the man who reads Toni Morrison at 8 in the morning.
Yeah.
What's his name? Paul. No.
Oh God, I forgot this name.
But it's just perfect. This is the kind of doubt that he will have. So
Right.
I already started thinking, someone who's watched one of Paranjit's films and is a big quandary or something like that. But I think romance is definitely like Sujata Kidla that day came and said she wants to write erotic thrillers. Uh, and we're all waiting for that. So now we'll wait for your romantic films. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Vijita. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Atulya